Bitcoin over the last 5 years has returned 55% CAGR. If you get a tenth of a Bitcoin right now, just sit on a tenth of a Bitcoin over, and your audience, I'm sure, is not old farts like me. You're probably younger. Well, guess what? You go 20 years, that's $64 million. That's enough. It's plenty in today's purchasing power. Now, I don't know what it's going to be then. That's cuck bucks. It could be like 200 million. Who knows? Could be buying a cup of coffee. But in today's dollars and purchasing power, that tenth of a Bitcoin is $64 million. Just let it sit there. That's enough. But you're going to struggle to come up with 100 grand when Bitcoin's $1 million a coin. And people that don't understand the train's leaving, anybody that's listening to this or watching it, you're making a bet right now. It's going to be about 30 days until President-elect Trump becomes President Trump. And when he does, if you're betting on the wrong side of this, you're going to have your eyes watered. You're going to sit there. We're going to put the dial on 11, cook noodles, and you're going to be sitting there going, wonder what the fuck just happened? Because it's going to take off. The train is leaving the station, and in about 30 days, you're making a bet right now. If you're not into Bitcoin, or if you're trading your Bitcoin, or if you're like these dipshits that are selling as it gets to 73K, you got to pull your head out and look around.
Greetings and salutations, my fellow plebs. My name is Walker, and this is the Bitcoin Podcast. The Bitcoin time chain is 875490, and the value of one Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin. Today's episode is Bitcoin Talk, where I talk with my guest about Bitcoin and whatever else comes up, and today, that guest is George Bodine. George is a Bitcoiner and an incredibly talented artist. But he's also been an oil field worker, cab driver, miner, cop, Navy fighter pilot, Top Gun graduate, and an airline captain. Needless to say, he is a fascinating guy. We get into a bunch of topics today, including the transformative power of Bitcoin, the urgency for individuals to invest, Bitcoin market dynamics, the role of the Bitcoin ETFs, the importance of understanding dollar cost averaging and UTXO management, the strategic Bitcoin reserve and the first mover advantage of nation states, and the future of MicroStrategy as a Bitcoin bank. We also discuss more broadly the future of Bitcoin as a store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account. I think you're going to enjoy the heck out of this conversation. I know I did. Before we dive in, do me a favor and subscribe to the Bitcoin Podcast wherever you're listening or watching. But personally, I recommend you check out fountain.fm, because not only can you send Bitcoin to your favorite podcasters to give value for value, but you can earn Bitcoin just for listening to podcasts. Check out bitcoinpodcast.net for episodes and additional resources. Head to the show notes to grab discount links for my sponsor, Bitbox, or go directly to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use promo code Walker for 5% off. Send an email to hello@bitcoinpodcast.net if you have feedback or if you're interested in sponsoring the Bitcoin Podcast. And if you find this show valuable, consider giving value back by giving it a zap on Nostr or a boost on Fountain. Without further ado, let's get into this Bitcoin Talk with George Bodine. George, man, it's good to see you. I wish it was in the flesh, but at least you're coming through crystal clear. This will have to do for now. But how's it going? How's life?
Life's great. I'm really in a great place right now. You're looking at my studio for the viewers right now. This is where I work. In fact, this painting behind me on the easel there is something I just started. It's going to be, believe it or not, this is going to be a painting art piece that mines Bitcoin. So I'm going to
explain that a little more.
I'm going to have a BitAxe Mars lander as part of the art piece. And the Mars lander has like these neat little lights. They glow, neon lights. And they've got a little miner that runs back and forth mining the Bitcoin. And then it flashes the Bitcoin price. It's going to be in the painting. So there's a plaque that goes next to it. And it says, this painting is mining Bitcoin. As you view this painting, the Bitcoin it produces is going to the hardware wallet of the person that owns this painting. That's what it's going to be, kind of like that. And so whoever owns it, they can just send it to their whatever, Lightning wallet or whatever.
I mean, that is pretty slick, I've got to say. I've been wanting to get one of those BitAxes. I need to just pull the trigger. Maybe I'll get a couple of them and tinker around, because it's a pretty sweet little product. Like making it just super accessible for folks. It's not going to cost you as much as a brand new Antminer, obviously, or Bitmain. So that's sweet. But I haven't heard of a painting that is mining Bitcoin yet. This sounds like it might be a first.
I don't know about that. I just know it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, maybe Fractal Encrypt has put together something yet in one of those intricate designs that also has a Bitcoin miner in there. I wouldn't put it past him, but no, that's sweet. And I've got a couple of your pieces here in the house. They're out of frame behind me, but the ones from that was from the Bitcoin is Venice series that you did. They're not the originals, obviously, but they're part of the limited prints. And I love those. And for folks that don't know, you did the cover for Bitcoin is Venice as an actual painting first, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, I did that, and then in fact, there's a kind of a neat story behind that, because the author Alan Farrington, and I didn't mention, but Sasha too, but Alan, he ended up kind of helping orange pill me into self-custody. That is, he showed me and demonstrated how easy it was to actually get Bitcoin through the base layer. I'd never seen that before. And I tell you, it just blew me away. It was like one of those sit on your ass moments. And I thought, this is incredible. And it helped solidify my descent into the rabbit hole where I've been mining down there ever since.
Did you meet Alan as a result of him commissioning your work, or was that how you guys got connected?
No, he actually had bought a painting for a friend, just one of my floral paintings. I'm represented in galleries around the country, and he just bought one and connected with me. And then, of course, I was already into the Bitcoin, and he was, and we connected through Twitter. And the next thing you know, he commissioned the piece, and I'm really happy with that painting. That painting's in the permanent collection with Bitcoin magazines. I don't know if I think they call it an art museum now. They're trying to build a space for permanent collection.
And that's awesome. And it's such an incredible piece, and just like an incredible, actually, series of pieces. There's 4 total that go with it, or 4 total from that series, right?
Yeah, thanks.
It's something else. And I love this too. I think the first time you and I met was at a dinner organized by Larry Lepard in Miami. Maybe that was 2022. Does that sound right?
It was, yeah.
That was I met it's nice. Shout out to Greg Foss for inviting Carla and I to that dinner Larry was organizing. But that was just such a good time. And I meet you. You've got on a pretty awesome jacket, like blazer that was just over the top. And you're like, hey, I'm George the artist. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, and then I got to know a little bit of your backstory, and I was like, who the heck is this guy? Like, what you've lived quite a rich life, and you continue to live quite a rich life. And I was just I was blown away, and I'm glad that we've gotten the chance to hang out a good amount since then. And now finally, since I've started, yet another Bitcoin podcast, I've got you on here too. So what could be better, man?
It couldn't be any better. I think this is a really important time right now in Bitcoin, and I think these podcasts are really important also. I think that we've got a limited amount of time here to get people either get their shit squared away or get them on board or whatever you want to call it. But time is running out. The train is going to leave the station soon. Yeah, I have a really unusual background. And so we should stay right at the beginning before we start out here that this is not financial advice in any way, shape, or form. I'm often the village idiot when it comes to investing. The only thing I'll say is with Bitcoin and my recent game playing with MicroStrategy, I've nailed it on these 2 assets. And in fact, that's all my wealth is Bitcoin, or a Bitcoin proxy now with MicroStrategy. But I have everything in Bitcoin. So,
yeah, it is important, I think, for people. There's so many people that talk about Bitcoin, and especially now that Bitcoin's, pumping up in price, or I guess actually now it's crashed today. It may be dead. It's all the way down to $98,000 a coin or whatever it is. And, oh dear Lord, it must be over. But you see so many people coming out of the woodwork with the bull market cycle of the FUD, right? Which is, well, this is clearly, it's, a Ponzi scheme, clearly going to crash crash and go to nothing. It's, it went from the government's going to ban Bitcoin to, well, this is terrible that the government might be buying Bitcoin. And like the narratives just keep evolving for why Bitcoin is terrible. And same people come out of the woodwork, the Peter Schiffs, but also new people come out who are, financial experts in their field to tell you how bad Bitcoin is. And it's very obvious that there's no skin in the game for them. It's like, if you think that Bitcoin's going to zero, why don't you short it? Go ahead. Plenty of ways for you to do that now. But I think it's so, I wish that people would ignore that kind of noise, maybe make fun of it a little bit, have a laugh with it. But for the people that are just getting into Bitcoin, I think that kind of advice is so damaging, because they're not getting an honest answer from people. They're not getting honest advice, and they're getting advice from people who don't have skin in the game and frankly haven't spent much time looking into this. They just have a knee-jerk reaction, Ponzi, tulip, whatever. They need to be listening to people who Bitcoin has actually changed their lives for the better. And I think that you are one of those people. You've got a kind of a great story there, and Bitcoin is now really allowing you to live that life that you want. But maybe for folks that don't know you, George, can you tell us a little bit about, and start wherever you want with this, because I know it's a long one, but who are you? How did you get here today to be, George, the artist who is also a hardcore Bitcoiner?
So I do have an interesting background in the sense that it's not a traditional finance background or anything even really remotely close to that. I ended up, I lived out west in Colorado, didn't graduate from high school. I actually was, I was expelled from high school, kicked out for hitting a teacher, unfortunately. So, yeah, and the funny thing is, in today's world, that could have been the end of my life right there. I could have just stopped. 17 years old, that's it. You get into the system, maybe out of my parents might have lost me, who knows what could have happened. But in those days, I was very fortunate. And my parents said, you probably should not go back to school. So I was 17 years old. I'd always loved flying. My dad loved flying, and he said, hey, I'll pay for you to get a private pilot's license. After that, you're on your own, but if you want to. And I'd always loved planes. So I jumped at the chance, and I got my license. It was very cheap in those days. It was like $800 or something, or maybe less. And it was great, and I loved it. But when you're done, there's nothing you can do with that if you want to do something like in the commercial flying field. You got to go on. You got to build hours. So I flew airplanes for a guy that was like a used car dealer with airplanes. So I'm 17 years old. He'd give me a bus ticket. I'd go out somewhere, and he'd buy a plane, sight unseen, and then I'd go and pick it up. Well, they were all different airplanes. So, many a time, I'm not making this up, I was in the cockpit, I would get the owner's manual out, and I'd read how to start it, how to change the gas, from tank to tank, stuff like that. And I did that. I got my 250 hours commercial license. And at the time, I went to college. Then I started college again out west, but I dropped out of college. So my high school dropped out of college. And I ended up working in the oil fields out west. And that was an interesting experience. And then after a while, I had applied out west. I became a cop out there in a cowboy, kind of a really rough town. With cowboys and Indians. And I mean real ones. And one time I went to a bar fight at night, and outside in front of the bar, and these bars had bullet holes in them. Outside of the bar was a guy with his horse tied up to the bar. That's the kind of place it was. And in fact, you couldn't go in by yourself wearing a uniform. They'd kick the shit out of you. So I did that for quite a while, and then I ended up drifting south down into Colorado, and I worked as a miner. Not a Bitcoin miner. An actual real miner, between a mile and 2 miles down. So it's really deep mining. And I did that. And then, I know it sounds like I was trying to become like the world's most interesting man, but, really, I just didn't know what to do with my life. And, if somebody would have looked at me working down in that mine 2 miles down there and walking around in the mud and covered in muck and just living a crummy life, they would have thought, what a loser. So I felt like a loser after a while, and I went back to college. I drove a cab at night in Denver and made a lot of money to help myself in college. At the time, the Navy was hurting for pilots, and I ended up getting in the Navy. you're too young, but there's an old movie called Officer and a Gentleman. That's the kind of training I went to. You show up and there's a Marine DI and he gets like 4 inches in front of your face and starts screaming at you. And I made it through that. And because of my flying background, I actually graduated #1 in my flight training. And I got to pick F-18s, Hornets, which is that plane that was in the last movie, the Top Gun movie. And that was shit hot. I mean, that was a lot of fun to fly that thing. And then I did go through Top Gun. And I ended up being an instructor, an adversary instructor. So I got to fly those really neat little planes that were in the first movie. I don't know if you remember, they were really fun. I mean, you would go around real fast with your hair on fire and just pretend you were Russian and attack the guy. It was a blast. Man. And then I got out and I flew for Delta. And then after that, I became a captain. I've flown all over with Delta all around the world. But unfortunately, I also, just like painting here, I like to do creative things. And I built a chopper by myself, did the welding and all that. But unfortunately, it was dangerous as hell. And I had a bad accident with a traumatic brain injury. So that ended my flying career, and I was kind of retired medically, which wasn't a bad deal for me, actually. And I started doing the painting full time then. So it's worked out really good. But, the thing is, the thing to take from this story is you can always reinvent yourself. You're not... I know it seems sometimes like things are almost at a dead end. One of the beauties about Bitcoin is it gives you so much freedom. I mean, look at me today. I'm all in on Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the royal flush. So when you understand that, you just take your chips, you put them in the table, and you're done. And you know what? That's what it's like. And now I don't have to sit there. I don't lay awake wondering about what the Fed's going to say next week. I don't give a shit what they do with the money supply. I don't worry about earnings reports, 10Ks, all the stuff that I used to study, all the macro stuff. I don't even do it now. I just relax and enjoy myself. Sorry for that long-winded answer.
Not at all. That's I always say that this show is a safe space for long-winded answers, rants, tangents, anything you want to go on. There are no rules on this show. But I appreciate that background. I think that's such a good message too. That like you do not have to be what you are today forever, right? If you know, that's not to say like that maybe you like who you are right now, and that's fine. If you like it, keep going. But for a lot of people out there, I think especially folks who are in my generation right now, and even in the Gen Z, the Zoomers, I think there's a lot of feeling of like, you were told that you have to go on this certain path, and that these are the steps that you must take if you want to be a successful, well-rounded member of society, and that it's this particular, path, and get good grades and follow the rules, and then, graduate from high school and then go to college and get good grades and follow the rules, and then, apply for jobs and work hard at those jobs and put in lots of long hours and do that just, for the next 45 years. And then you can finally, take a break, after you've, crushed your spirit as a cog in the corporate machine for your entire life. And I think people are starting to just wise up to that a bit and realize that, you know what, maybe this whole thing is a bit of a scam. And I'm supposed to, as Mahlers has said, I'm supposed to work for money that another guy can print for free. I'm supposed to put all of my energy and my creative potential into creating for a corporate behemoth that doesn't give a shit about me. And I'm supposed to just kind of do that forever and accept that. But I think people are realizing, especially Bitcoiners are the kind of the vanguard of this, that you don't have to do that. There are other ways to go through life. And as you said, you can reinvent yourself. You can grow. You should try to grow, right? Whether that's professionally or, creatively as a side project, or even starting another silly, Bitcoin podcast. Like there are infinite ways to grow. And I think that that's just it's a wonderful message. And I'm curious too, how did you end up, what was the moment where you realized, okay, I need to go all in on Bitcoin? Like, I've got the royal flush. What was your orange pill moment, your aha moment, your eureka moment, whatever you want to call it?
Well, it kind of ties in with what you were just talking about, because it is important to just keep learning. You've got to always challenge yourself. You can't stop. And, from the time that I first, I heard about Bitcoin in 2012, I think, and I thought it was stupid, a scam, all the typical stuff. So I just blew it off. But Lynn Alden came back She started in 2017. I read her blog on Bitcoin, and I thought, she's not into it. I can just tell, and I just passed it up again. But unlike me, she kept studying and learning. And, next thing I know, it's like February or so of 2020, she comes out with another article, and I thought, it's changed. I need some of this. And, I started studying right there. And initially, I bought some Bitcoin. I don't know if you remember that time. It was really cheap, and it started going way up real fast. And I sold it. I sold all of it. I had it like 3 days. And I thought, what the hell? Like 2 days later, I was staring at the screen. I remember thinking, what the fuck did I do that for? Why did I sell that? And I couldn't answer the question. So I just kept studying. And every month, year, I just got more and more convicted. And I can't tell you when I actually pushed all my chips in, but it wasn't very long after that. And obviously, volatility is very difficult to deal with. And you guys have got some great videos on the downside of volatility, but on the upside, it's difficult too. It shakes people out. You mentioned the fact that Bitcoin price is down today. Long-term holders, the people that we often think of as not selling their Bitcoin, they've sold 1 million coins since like about 60K up to where we are. They're selling 30,000 coins a day right now, long-term holders. Now, if you look at the money that's behind that sale, it's not much. It's like they're in that 56 to 65K cohort, not the really deep long-term holders, but it's still a significant pressure on the market. I'm surprised that the market has held up as well as it has, and that there's this continuous buy behind all this sell pressure. It's pretty remarkable. I attribute a lot of it to the ETFs. That is one of the most powerful forces right now driving Bitcoin price, but also even adoption. There are so many people. I just saw the other day, 80% of the ETF purchases are by, and this is according to Van Eck, retail. That's a pretty powerful cohort of people that are behind that. And what it really means is a lot of the institutions, the RIAs, basically the wirehouses, they haven't arrived yet. When they get here, there's going to be more pressure.
Yeah, it is quite interesting the amount of. Oh, you're good. The amount of coins. Oh no, well, you still sound good. Maybe take an extra orange pill just to clear that out of your system. But no, looking at, because I'd seen that too with some of the what are classified as long-term hodlers selling a good amount of coins into the market, and it is getting absorbed right up. And when I say Bitcoin is down today, it's like, come on guys, we're still we're at a rounding error still. So I just always think that's funny. But I'm very interested to see kind of what happens in this next next like month for one, and next year for another, and then for the next kind of whole cycle, like what happens up until this next halving. And my plan hasn't changed. It's continued to dollar cost average with the money I make and the money I can't afford to lose. So I want to put that in Bitcoin. I'm going to just keep trying to create value, dollar cost average. But I think it still doesn't feel, because you mentioned retail, it's like retail has definitely arrived at the ETFs. It doesn't seem that retail has really arrived as much at the just, let's say, spot Bitcoin itself. It still seems like there's, and I wonder how much of that is, I think a lot of it's probably people for the first time had a vehicle, a very convenient vehicle to move like 401k dollars into get some sort of Bitcoin exposure, right? And there's no unit bias problem with the ETFs. They're, trading at whatever, 50, 60 bucks a pop. That's much more approachable, right? I can buy all these Bitcoin ETF units, whatever. But I think the 100K or 0.1 million, to use Samson Mo's nomenclature, that level, as much as it was a psychological level to reach it and hit it and surpass it, it becomes, I think, kind of like a psychological blocker for a lot of people, where they have this idea that, oh, well, I missed the boat. Like it's at 100K. Like I'm never going to make life-changing money with this, so I may as well invest in whatever fart coin or whatever other the meme coin du jour is. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that for people. Like, do you think that, because you mentioned, trains kind of leaving the station, but do you think there's still plenty of time for folks to get on board?
No, I don't. I think the train is leaving the station, and I just can't explain how important this particular period is. You and I, we're set. We're sitting on the train. We got our Bitcoin ticket. Carla's next to you. I've got everybody with me, except a lot of my family members aren't with me. And, if you look out on that platform, you look through the window, there's a whole bunch of people that you love or that are, your family members, your friends, and they're not with you. And quite frankly, they're not going to, in the future, they're not going to be able to accumulate the level of Bitcoin that you could have in this period that we've been going through. And right now,
if you are worried that the Bitcoin train is leaving the station, then the best thing you can do is to get yourself some Bitcoin. Then go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use the promo code Walker for 5% off the easy-to-use Bitcoin-only BitBox02 hardware wallet. Then get your Bitcoin off the exchange and into your own self-custody. Bitcoin has been ripping and will continue to do so, and your stack will soon be worth a heck of a lot more in fiat value than it is today. So now is the perfect time to make sure you have your security locked down tight with BitBox. And the BitBox also makes a great gift for the holidays. Plus, and I cannot emphasize this part enough, but the BitBox02 is easy as hell to use. Whether you're brand new to Bitcoin and it's your first time setting up a hardware wallet, so you're a little bit nervous, or you are a well-seasoned psychopath. It is Bitcoin only and, again, fully open source. You can head to their GitHub and verify that for yourself. There is no need to trust me or to trust BitBox. And when you go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use that promo code Walker, not only do you get 5% off a great piece of open source Bitcoin only hardware, but you also help support this podcast. So thank you.
For instance, let's just think for a minute. Let's just go back and talk about the train leaving the station. I bought Bitcoin when it dipped. I bought Bitcoin at 17,000. Let's just say that I bought a tenth of a Bitcoin and it would cost me $1,700. Now today, it's 2 years later, I got to come up with 10 grand for that Bitcoin. Same amount of Bitcoin. Well, I'm here to tell you right now, I may be a village idiot on some things, but you know what? I do understand Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is going to $1 million a coin. And when it does, you're going to have to come up with 100 grand. And as far as being too late, what the hell do you want? Listen to this. Bitcoin over the last 5 years has returned 55% CAGR. That's cumulative annual growth rate per year. That's reinvesting, just leaving it sitting in there, 55% a year. If you get a tenth of a Bitcoin right now, just sit on a tenth of a Bitcoin over, and your audience, I'm sure, is not old farts like me. You're probably younger. Well, guess what? You go 20 years, that's $64 fucking million. That's enough. It's plenty in today's purchasing power. Now, I don't know what it's going to be then. That's cuck bucks. It could be like 200 million. Who knows? Could be buying a cup of coffee. But in today's dollars and purchasing power, that tenth of a Bitcoin is $64 million. Just let it sit there. That's enough. But you're going to struggle to come up with 100 grand when Bitcoin's $1 million a coin. And people that don't understand the train's leaving, you're sitting there right now. Anybody that's listening to this or watching it, you're making a bet right now. All those long-term holders I told you about that are leaving Bitcoin, that a lot of LTHs, the long-term holder, they sold coins into the 73 peak. Then a lot of them sold and are still selling in the 100K peak. And we usually call these people smart money. Long-term holders sell into every bull run, and you can just watch it on chain. And I do a lot of on-chain analysis. I want to give a shout out right now for James Check. If you're looking for him, he's Checkmatey on Twitter. He puts out a premium. I only subscribe to 2 newsletters. His is 1. And he can help you stack 15 to 20% more Bitcoin as you buy if you'll just pay attention to on-chain and know when to buy. So I do a lot of on-chain, and we usually call these people smart money that sell into these peaks. And I'm here to tell you right now, I think they're stupid money, because you are making a bet right now. We've got, I don't know when this will come out, but it's going to be about 30 days until President-elect Trump becomes President Trump. And when he does, if you're betting on the wrong side of this, you're going to have your eyes watered. You're going to sit there. We're going to put the dial on 11, cook noodles, and you're going to be sitting there going, wonder what the fuck just happened? Because it's going to take off. Now, if he doesn't put out an executive order or doesn't use the bill that's maybe before him from Congress, I don't know. I assume that Bitcoin's price will probably fall a little bit. So again, you're making a bet. But do you want to be on the wrong side of that bet? What is the upside to what I'm talking about compared to the downside? If it's going down, if I had any more chips left, I'd be buying. I don't have anything. I'm Bitcoin rich, and I barely have enough money for a sandwich sometimes. So, what I'm saying is the train is leaving the station, and in about 30 days, you're making a bet right now. If you're not into Bitcoin, or if you're trading your Bitcoin, or if you're like these dipshits that are selling as it gets to 73K, you got to pull your head out and look around. Anyway, I don't mean to rant here, but it just floors me.
What I tell you about rants? It's a safe space for them. No worries. But no, I think this is a fair point. There's always like that. It's basically a meme at this point of your friend asking you, like, oh, well, should I buy some Bitcoin now, or should I wait until it goes lower? And whenever you get those kind of texts, it's always just kind of like, I don't know, man. Do whatever you want with your own money. I'm still buying now. Because again, I'm not a trader. I'm not some sophisticated investor. I just dollar cost average. And when I, have a little bit of extra fiat lying around, I'll, make a little bit of a smash buy. But otherwise, I just kind of set it and forget it and try to accumulate and again, create value so that I can keep generating some fiat to sell that dirty fiat for Bitcoin or earn in Bitcoin when I can, whenever it's possible. Because that's a great feeling too. There's no fiat involved. That's a beautiful thing. But I think that as we're getting into, we're getting into this point, the whole gradually then suddenly, right? Like the suddenly happens very, very suddenly. And I think that, maybe it's because after this last cycle with the whole FTX blowout and all of that stuff, everybody thought, oh, this is, we're going into a super cycle. We're going to, this is the 4-year cycle is dead. It's going to, it's going up forever. And it's like, maybe that jaded some people to think, okay, well, we're just going to have another collapse like after FTX. And Bitcoin's probably going to take another, massive haircut at some point. Maybe it'll take a 50% drop or a 60, 70% drop, but that might be dropping down from $1 million. You know what I mean? Like the magnitude of these drops is going to get and runs is going to get more violent, but the numbers we're dealing with are just so much larger. And I think that for people right now, it's like, again, the message that I give to friends and family, and thankfully a number have actually listened, is just set up a dollar cost average, and if you've got the balls to just say, fuck, like, screw it, I'm just gonna dive all in on this, good for you. If you've got a lot of excess fiat lying around, I don't have a lot of fiat just lying around. I earn fiat and then I save in Bitcoin. And I think that that's good advice for most people. But right now, it's like you're kind of right that, we're still early, but the magnitude of your earliness is going to potentially decrease exponentially in the coming months and years. And things are going to happen very, very quickly. And I don't think people are really mentally prepared for that. Either probably most Bitcoiners are not, except maybe some of the, the psychos who have been around for a lot longer than I have. But certainly most no-coiners are definitely not prepared for that. And if you're not holding Bitcoin in the coming years, I think you're going to feel very angry, probably feel very foolish, but not want to admit your own foolishness. So you're going to find ways to take out that anger on the greedy Bitcoiners who just got lucky. You know what I mean?
We've seen a lot of that already. I mean, we're seeing some of that now. I would have to say, I think that the last cycle probably did cause a lot of PTSD for people. I believe personally that the last cycle was truncated, that we basically were on our way up to 100K. And I did call for that. So again, I'm a village idiot sometimes. I got that wrong. Another thing I got wrong is I really did think that institutions would be arriving during that last cycle. that I was wrong. They absolutely were not. I did not understand the barriers that were there to entry. The change in FASB accounting rules from intangible asset. If you wanted to make Bitcoin the most toxic thing that you could make it, so you couldn't hold it on a treasury sheet, you'd call it an intangible asset. Well, that's over. And in fact, on the 15th of December, that's done. FASB rules have changed. It's now at fair market value. But it wasn't then. The other thing is that January 1st, MicroStrategy is going to start reporting in that next quarter using those new guidelines. But the other thing is I didn't understand until recently how in-depth and how deep the choke point 2.0 was, and how the Biden administration was working so hard to curtail crypto and Bitcoin development, causing tremendous harm with banks. And I'm not talking about Silvergate. I'm talking about Silver or one of the other ones that was basically shut down, and they weren't insolvent. I mean, so 2.0 was in full effect. And then the other thing is that I really think the unwinding of the GBTC premium and what happened from that, because you remember the GBTC premium went to a discount during that period, and that was a huge underbid to Bitcoin just day after day, like a roller coaster. And finally it stopped. And when it did, when it went to discount, people had to unwind. And that's when we discovered, Three Arrows Capital, Genesis, eventually all of this leading into FTX. And that, that was paper Bitcoin. That guy, that was fraudulent stealing of other people's Bitcoin. And that was paper Bitcoin out there. So I think all those things contributed to the unwind of the market. Plus, it had gone up so quickly, I think it just ran out of steam. These legs that we're going through right now, even this one at 100K or so, that's really important. If we can stay in there and build a base, it's going to make our what comes next even more sustainable. But I do want to address one last thing you said. DCA is something that, as Bitcoiners, we've talked about for years. And I'm a big fan of DCA. Bitcoin Magazine just had a great article on it like 4 days ago. So the only thing I'm going to caution people is this. And we can talk about this later. We don't have to get into it now. But if you don't understand what you're doing with your DCA and you leave those UTXOs out there that you have bought and they are small, like they even talked about $25 for a DCA average. You are going to lose that Bitcoin. It's going to be gone forever. It's coming. I'd say, again, you're flipping the coin, because on January 20th, on the next day, if he's in office and this happens, you're going to be stranded, economically stranded. All that Bitcoin you got on the base layer is going to be sitting there. You won't be able to get to it if you don't know what you're doing.
That's a very important point. And I think for people who may be wondering, like, what the heck is George talking about here? The very long story short, I did an episode with Wicked Smart Bitcoin, which he's awesome. And we dug into this because he's been super vocal about UTXO management. Basically, if you are dollar cost averaging using exchange, again, not financial advice, but just some practical advice, it is a very foolish idea to have that some exchanges will let you automatically transfer that DCA to your cold storage. Sounds nice, terrible idea. You should wait and accumulate until you have a decent stack, whatever you're comfortable with, on the exchange, and then transfer it in bulk so that you have one UTXO, one unspent transaction output that ends up in your cold storage. It's like, you don't have to leave it on the exchange forever, but just wait until you have a bit of a stack built up there, and then transfer it off in a lump, because otherwise it becomes basically impossible to spend if your UTXOs are too small, because literally the transaction fees will just eat it all up. Like and maybe if they're higher than the amount of your UTXO, that's just unspendable then. You can't do anything at all with it. So it's a very easy thing to fix, especially when fees are low right now. You can consolidate, take a bunch of those addresses and send them to yourself. There are also privacy trade-offs with that you should be aware of. But it's, again, everything is trade-offs, right? Everything is a little bit of a deciding what side of the bet you want to be on. But best advice I can give is do not automatically transfer your DCA buys from an exchange to your cold storage. That's the easiest way to fix this. Let it build up a little bit, develop a decent sized stack of sats, and then transfer them in bulk, and you will thank yourself later. Is there anything you would add to that bit of advice?
No, I really went down this rabbit hole after I attribute this to Bob Burnett, CEO of Barefoot Mining, getting me down this rabbit hole. But the more I've studied it, I'm just telling you right now, people are not prepared for what's coming. Let's just say, I'll tell you one of the reasons I'm so bullish right now is because of the election. I don't know if you remember this or not. It was back in January of this year. It was Peter McCormick in one of his episodes. He had on Preston Pish and Luke Groman. And Danny was there too. And one of the things that came out in that discussion, this is secondhand, is that someone had overheard, because Trump was involved in being orange-pilled at this time. People were talking to him about Bitcoin. And someone heard him say on the phone, Bitcoin is the new oil. Now, just think about if that's true. Now, I'm agnostic. I don't give a damn about these politicians. But I will tell you right now, if he meant that he understood that the petrodollar, which came about in the mid-'70s with Kissinger, Nixon, if he understands that oil is really the basis of the petrodollar, and I'll bet he does, then is he saying that Bitcoin is going to be taking some of that status away from oil? In other words, are we going to start moving to Bitcoin as an underpinning layer to the dollar? And then the other thing is, when he came out, I thought the speech by Robert Kennedy, Senator Lummis, and President-elect Trump too at the conference, I thought that was a crossing the Rubicon moment. You know where that term comes from? It's 49 BC. It's when Caesar was about to cross the river Rubicon, and he was marching to Rome. And at the time, that was an act of treason. To cross the river with your army meant you were attacking the Senate and the Republic. And so he crossed. And Alena Jacta est, he said, when he got to the other side, which means the die is cast. He knew that when he had crossed the river, that was it. He either went on and was victorious, or he would be executed. And of course, that was the end of the Republic and the start of the Roman Empire. But I think when these things happened at that Bitcoin conference, and I kind of was against the idea of politics mixing with Bitcoin at the conference, but you know what? When those three speeches were done, we had crossed the Rubicon. We had made a commitment. If the U.S. on day one does not establish an SBR, a strategic Bitcoin reserve, or they hesitate and put it into a vote for Congress, the longer they hesitate, the more their hand is going to be forced, because other nations aren't going to wait. I honestly believe they're already stacking. If you go back to November 9th and you look at the buys that happened on that weekend, that's when Bitcoin was really pumping and started pumping big time. If you look at those buys, they're not normal buys. I've mentioned this before, but MicroStrategy, their goal, and they're required to, when they issue all that ATM at the market offerings of stock, they don't move the market. They purposely do not move the market. They use, dark pools, accelerators, OTC. They're doing everything they can, algos that are just buying without moving that market. They probably do provide support, but they're trying not to do it. Whoever was buying that weekend, they didn't give a shit. It was just smash the green buy button, 100 Bitcoin, 200 Bitcoin, and they didn't care about slippage. Do you know what I'm saying? Slippage? They didn't care if the price moved up or not. They were agnostic to price. So, is that like one of these Middle Eastern countries? Is it some wealthy sovereign state that has its own printing press, or is so wealthy it doesn't give a damn? Imagine if the United States wants Bitcoin. Do you think they're going to give a shit if it's $110 or $150,000? They're not going to care. If it's President Trump, he's just going to say, "Get me the Bitcoin." And I don't think so. I guess what I'm trying to say is this: you have a narrow window now to participate in this game, and even if I'm wrong, about us establishing a Bitcoin reserve, even if I'm wrong. Your time is narrow because other people get it. We've already seen that. What did Putin say at the news conference the other day? Who can ban Bitcoin? Nobody. He gets it. They just had a member of their parliament or their house put forth a bill to establish it as a treasury. So the nation states get this, and it's going to happen.
Yeah, and I want to, first of all, well said. And second, I want to dig into this a little bit because I think the game theory here is really fascinating. And it's, Bitcoin is a paradigm shift, right? It's a fundamental shift in how the world works and how money works. And that kind of shift can really only happen once. I think, it was either probably both American Hodel and Jeff Booth have basically said something to the effect of like, we've had gold for 5,000 years. Fiat was an aberration. Like it was kind of like this freak, Fiat's also existed, but not in the pure fiat way that it is now, in this, kind of like destructive, like funding forever wars, destroying people's savings. It hasn't existed to that extent as it has for the past, 75, years or so. But now we have Bitcoin. And so it's gold for 5,000 years, a little blip of fiat, and then Bitcoin, for another 5,000 years, maybe? Who knows? As long as it stays decentralized and secure, to quote Jeff Booth again. But I think that people really need to pay attention to what's happening right now. Both Bitcoiners hopefully are already paying attention. You're already stacking sats. But if you do not own any Bitcoin yet, you really, really need to ask yourself why. And do you have a good reason for not owning any? And, with this, I wanted to get into kind of the game theory of the nation state thing, because I think this is super fascinating. Because even if you just look at, let's just consider the G7 countries, right? The big players who are all, they all have the ability to print their own currencies, right? They can make fiat like that, but just a few keystrokes, right? Make those zeros pop up on the screen. The first major country that has its own fiat currency, that starts printing that fiat currency to acquire Bitcoin, the hardest money that has ever existed, they are going to have the first mover advantage. And I think you're right that there is some of this stuff happening behind the scenes already. Yes, we know El Salvador, they don't print their own fiat, they're dollarized. They've been doing it very publicly, and good for them. I think that's going to lift their nation into an amazing place. Already is, but then in the future, it's going to be, exponentially so. Kingdom of Bhutan, mining Bitcoin with excess hydropower, has accumulated, I think, like $1 billion worth of Bitcoin just from excess hydro. Mm-hmm. But where do you think, we're getting to this point where Trump is about to take office. All signs seem to point to the fact that either via executive order or legislation, which has already been proposed, Lummis already has this bill out there. There's some other draft legislation out there as well, that the United States is going to move forward with this. Do you think they end up being the first? Do you think we see some surprise prior to that, where another country announces, "Oh, we're actually doing this," a week before Trump takes office? Or how do you see this game playing out right now? And what do you I don't know. What do you think is going to happen here? Because I think it's going to get very, very interesting, regardless of what the United States does. I don't think there's any stopping. Nothing stops this train. There's nothing stopping these other countries. We're, as you said, we've crossed the Rubicon, and there is kind of no going back. It's full steam ahead, or I don't know what the other option is.
Well, Michael Saylor said that MicroStrategy has utilized a lot of the things that you just brought up there as far as accumulation and getting ahead. They're uncatchable now. I can talk about that later, but they're uncatchable. Yeah. They will not be caught. So, first mover is very important. Just thinking for a minute here, let's look back at what's going on with the administration over the last 3 weeks. Let's look at the people that they've put in. Bissett, he met with Senator Lummis. So did David Sachs. I guess he's going to be the crypto head or something. All I hear are positive things coming from them in regards to an SBR. The other thing is, and I don't know if you saw this or not, but in Abu Dhabi, when Eric Trump was talking, he said one line that every single Bitcoiner should have just gone and sat up in their chair and said, son of a bitch. He said, and as an aside, I've known Michael Saylor for 20 years.
Have you?
Do you think, yes. And do you think during those 20 years, maybe Michael Saylor had the ear of anybody else in that family? And not only that, getting back to President-elect Trump, here's another thing he said. I don't know if you remember this because he got a lot of controversy about this. Bitcoiners didn't like it. He said, we want to make sure going forward that all Bitcoin is mined in the U.S., in the USA. And then he coupled it, I thought, pretty sharp with the idea that we want to be the dominant energy supplier in the world. But when he said that, you've got to, when you talk about game theory and you talk about transaction fees, you talk about the base chain and stuff, just imagine that this actually happens. The U.S. government starts to stack Bitcoin. Let's say that other governments start to stack Bitcoin. To get a transaction on a block is not always going to be easy to do. It's coming to a point where it's going to be very difficult. You and I, we're privileged. We get, we'll be able to tell our kids or grandkids someday that we did transactions on the base layer. They're going to go, what? No way, Pops. But yeah. So the thing is that imagine President Trump there is, they're stacking Bitcoin and he's moving it around. Senator Lummis says we should disperse it around the country and they're moving Bitcoin. 4:00 in the afternoon when President Trump calls down to somebody, says, hey, move that Bitcoin over to such and such. And they come back and go, well, we're going to put a high transaction fee on it to try and get your load into the transaction, into the mempool. And hopefully it'll be in the block. President Trump's going to just hang out the phone. He's going to, hey, get me somebody else who can guarantee me that I can get a transaction into the blockchain. And you think other countries, you talked about other countries. Well, I can tell you right now, hash rate is coming from other countries. It's coming from Russia, China. It's coming from all kinds of countries right now. And these nation states, when they're moving their Bitcoin, there's not going to be any of this, let's fight with the plebs to get a high transaction fee so we can get a transaction in the blockchain. That's not happening. And so you know what that really means? It means that the United States, in MicroStrategy too, by the way, this is going to happen. They've got to start mining their own Bitcoin. They've got to control. They shouldn't give a shit at all about making Bitcoin. They're going to mine it only so they have control of that mempool and the block space. That block space is going to be, say President Trump just calls down. He says, tomorrow between 4 and 5 p.m., we are doing this on the blockchain. Make sure we have 2 or 3 spots on that blockchain. Well, the only way you're going to get it as a country is if you have your own mining and you are contributing the hash rate. You can get about 5% of the hash rate right now, and you can maybe get out, 5 to 7 transactions guaranteed during a day. So that is going to become a source of contention. People are going to start fighting over that. And for those plebs that haven't consolidated UTXOs, you're going to be sitting there. You're going to be fighting the U.S. government or companies. For instance, I know where this is going with MicroStrategy, and Saylor's already told us. I'll take a break now, but I can expand on that. I know what he's going to do.
Well, no, I'm curious. What you think? Are you saying also you think that MicroStrategy is going to try to start spinning up hash rate themselves as an entity?
At some time, they're going to have to. So, I don't know if I told you this, but I know I mentioned Bitcoin. Well, I bought MicroStrategy also like years ago, and I got it, I don't know, like $12 a share or something. It was crazy. And it went way up. And what did they used to call me Jethro in the Navy because I sometimes wasn't bright. Jethro Bodine, you wouldn't even know that show. It's an old show called The Beverly Hillbillies. But
I actually do know that show.
Oh, well, Jethro has to use his fingers to count. So the thing is that I sold it all. And it's stupid that 2 days later I was sitting again. I was right in front of the computer. I'm just staring at it going, it's still going up. And I thought, why did I do that? Why did I sell that? But anyway, about just over a year ago, I started doing a really deep dive into MicroStrategy because here's what was bothering me. You know, Michael Saylor's not stupid. And why would he be buying all this Bitcoin? What is the point? Is he going to sit on it like an egg? I mean, is it like he's got some fixation on Bitcoin? There's got to be a point, a purpose to it. And so I thought for a long time about it. And I finally, about a year ago, it hit me. I realized I was talking to Larry Lepard. And by the way, I want to give a shout out right now to Larry. He's got a new book that's coming out. And I read I got to read the galley. Man, it's a really shit hot book. But anyway, I was talking to him and I said, I think I know MicroStrategy is going to become the world's first Bitcoin bank, biggest bank in the world. And what did Saylor begin to drop as far as hints? And by the way, if you go back to 2010, Hal Finney talked about this in Bitcoin Talk Forum. He talked about Bitcoin banks. He felt that was where the future was going to go as far as off the base layer. It was Bitcoin banks, Bitcoin-backed banks. So Saylor has already given us the hints. Do you remember that conversation that he had with Saifedean Ammous about 2 months ago?
Yeah.
It's the one where they're kind of a little button heads.
They're going at it a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was called 4 Years to Bitcoin. If you go to 1 hour and 32 minutes into that podcast, and I've played it about 4 or 5 times now, there's a reason why Michael Saylor had that conversation. Because what was the conversation about? Bitcoin yield. Now, for anybody watching me right now, just pay attention while I say this one thing. If you have Bitcoin on a wallet and it's yours, it does not generate yield. But if you get yield on Bitcoin, you better figure out where it's coming from. So anyway, Saylor said, and he was pushing back on this. He said, well, what if it was in a country that was large with its own printer, its Fed, in a too big bank to fail? You could generate yield on your Bitcoin. You could live like the wealthy live now. Why does the royal family still have all their lands? Why do some families, the Rothschilds, why do they still have all their wealth? Because they never sell the wealth, the things that are wealthy like Bitcoin. And you're going to do that. You personally are going to be able to do that in the future. You never sell your Bitcoin. You'll be able to live off that Bitcoin going forward. It's going to happen. So Saylor's already interested in this. And then, did you see the interview on the 11th of December with Ayers, I think his last name is? It's in a white hall. They're talking back and forth. Did you watch that one?
I saw. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I saw some of the clips from it.
Same thing. Same discussion comes up. And when safe, he mentioned JP Morgan. Who's he mentioned again in this latest one? JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs. Too big to fail banks holding Bitcoin. In fact, there he takes it farther. He actually goes down the Hal Finney discussion, which is tokenized banks that are backed by Bitcoin or in stable coins, treasuries, because then he has a discussion about stable coins. So that is coming. And when those things happen, again, imagine Jamie Dimon, Mr. Evil. You think at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when he calls down to some pleb down there on the 8th floor down there in the basement and he says, hey, move 100 million to such and such, because banks, they want to do that. They're going to custody, sell, and they're going to trade, and then they're going to buy Bitcoin. And when they do it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they're going to demand that they have block space. They're going to demand that the transaction gets into the block space. That if that pleb says, well, Mr. Diamond, we got to put a transaction, high transaction. I mean, he's going to get fired, and they're going to start mining their own Bitcoin. Because, again, you have to have the hash rate. I'll tell you how. I'll tell you before I take a break real quick here. Just let me put this out to the people that don't understand. If you have a hardware wallet like God forsake, not a Ledger, but a Cold Car or something,
or a Bitbox maybe, since they sponsor the show.
A decent wallet, yeah, exactly, a good wallet.
Yeah.
So if you have a wallet like that, if you don't run your own node, whenever you transact with your Bitcoin, you're using somebody else's node. You cannot get a transaction on the base layer without a node. So you go through a node. All the miners are running nodes. Now, the miners themselves, people mining right now, are directing their hash rate to mining pools. But those pools have all got nodes. They're the ones that build what's called the template, the mempool template. That template is what decides whether you get to go into the block or not with your transaction. So imagine at the end of the day, you're sitting there. And by the way, you can only put, last year we put in 4,094 transactions per block for a whole year on average, every 10 minutes. That's not a lot. So those nodes, when the block's found, they broadcast the transaction. Whoever won the block, let's say it's a mining pool this time, because that's where most of them are going, and they already have a template built with all the transactions in it. It broadcasts to the other nodes instantaneously. They all check to see if it's by protocol signed, and then it's broadcast. And within 2 to 3 blocks, it's in the blockchain. Well, to get in there, it's going to be a war. We're going to be fighting over that block space. It's coming.
I think this is a kind of another reason why, first of all, UTXO consolidation is important for the average person, just so that you can actually spend your Bitcoin on chain at a later date when transaction fees are both higher in Bitcoin denominated terms and much higher in dollar or fiat denominated terms. But also, it's just it's one of the reasons that things like Lightning or Fedimints are so important as we go forward, because it's the entire 3 billion people, however many people we have on the planet now. They're not going to be holding Bitcoin in on-chain Bitcoin in self-custody, most likely. That's a nice thing to hope for, but just the reality of the situation is that it's probably not going to happen, right? I'm not going to say it will not happen. I'm saying it's probably not going to happen. But these other solutions exist,
You're right on. You got it. I mean, it's not going to happen. To put half of them, 4 billion on there, would take 25 years. I mean, if they took over the whole blockchain, if you give them half, it takes 50 years. You put the whole planet on there, it takes a century. So it's not going to happen. And like we talked about with Hal Finney, he knew that, Satoshi knew that, and we are not going to be able to do that going forward. So something's going to have to give on this base layer, for a secondary layer. Like you mentioned Lightning, and Lightning's great. I love Lightning. We'll use it all the time for like zaps and stuff, but it can't do it either. Fedimint is a very interesting idea. I'm really looking into pegged side chains right now, like Liquid. I think that could be a model going forward. And that could be a model that these banks end up using, that same model. It could be the blueprint for how they do that. And eventually, I hate to keep talking about yield, but eventually we might be able to legitimately, with the world's best capital on the planet, I mean, it is the greatest capital that you could possibly, the most pristine asset, and banks are going to want it. So if you're willing to understand the risk involved and where the yield comes from, that could work.
And I think that's such a key point is, and speaking of, Alan Farrington, he's always the one, especially when some of these Bitcoin yield thing, like Celsius, for example, blew up, he was always the one, where does the yield come from? Where does the yield come from? Because you should know. And also, you should know that you're taking a risk with that, because I struggle with saying that anything is risk-free from a lending your Bitcoin out perspective. And granted, one could make the argument, the counterpoint that, okay, well, there's also risks to self-custody if you screw something up, or you have a multi-sig and you lose 2 of the keys or whatever it is. And so there's risks everywhere, right? There's risks in anything you do. Your life is basically a series of decisions based on what kind of risk you are willing to take or not to take. And that's a decision that comes down to human action, right? What do you as an individual want to do? What are you comfortable with? What are you not comfortable with? So nobody's going to be able to tell you if that's the right decision for you. What's the right decision for Michael Saylor may not be the right decision for you. And that's okay too, but I'm glad, Liquid's a great example because it's been around for a while now. For anyone that hasn't used it, it works exceptionally well. And yeah, it's a federated model, right? It's a federated model. So you are putting there's a trade-off of trust there. You're trusting these federations. But they've been operating pretty damn well so far. It's not, I would rather have Bitcoin on the base chain in my own, multi-sig cold storage. But for certain things, Liquid is super, super useful. And like, I like I just had Prince Philip, who's, hereditary prince of Serbia and Yugoslavia, but also the chief strategy officer of Jan 3 on the show a few days ago, beginning of this week. Been a long week already. But we were talking about Aqua Wallet, which Jan 3 has come out with, which I've personally been using a lot more lately. I think it's super nice that it handles a lot of the stuff for you behind the scenes, like swapping between Lightning and Liquid. And I think that's really nice. That's a nice user experience for people who don't want to have to, still in your own custody, you're still holding the keys, but giving you a smoother user experience that allows you to still do a lot of different things and, convert to USDT if you want on Liquid, not on, Tron or on Ethereum, ERC20. Mm-hmm. So that's even better. Yeah. Like if you're going to use USDT, may as well use it on a Bitcoin sidechain instead of a shitcoin main chain. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I agree 100%. I really, I've used the Aqua Wallet also, and a shout out to Samson Mao. It's been a great experience. Just like you said, it's a fluid, easy experience between, BTC, Liquid BTC, Tether, and Lightning. And it's cheap. It's not expensive to use, and it's private. It's private. I mean, that's pretty cool. So I'm not sure where things are going. I just know that we're going to have some major disruptions coming over the next year. This is going to be a volatile, a difficult journey, I think, for a lot of people to handle.
What do you think, what advice do you have for folks that are maybe just starting to get into Bitcoin or just thinking about getting into Bitcoin? Like, what mistakes can they avoid? Or what's the biggest mistake that they could make that you would advise against?
Well, I always approach it as I know it sounds stupid, it's a three-legged stool. So I'm sitting on a three-legged stool, and that's a really old piece of furniture, thousands of years. You can see pictures of it on the inside of the pyramids. So the first leg is you got to stack Bitcoin. You got to get as much Bitcoin as you can right now. This is your opportunity to get Bitcoin, and then you've got to hold on to it. And how do you hold on to your Bitcoin? Well, first off, you've got to study. You've got to read. You've got to understand volatility. You don't want to do like Jethro. You don't want to have it going way up, or like these idiots at 73K, sell your Bitcoin. Don't do that. And the only way you'll not do that is if you just study. And then the last thing is you can't lose the Bitcoin. You just can't. You cannot lose it. It's too precious. So, you've been stacking, working your ass off. We've talked about DCA. That's really important. The next thing is, you can't be using leverage. There are all these idiots out there. MicroStrategy, Bitcoin's volatile. I just told you Bitcoin returned 55% a year for 5 years. That's good enough for anybody. If you want more volatility, do like I did and get some MicroStrategy, and then you'll get more excited. If you're an idiot, get the new leveraged ETFs on top of MicroStrategy, MSTX or MSTU, because they'll give you 4 times the volatility. And why would people do that? It's because every single cycle is the same thing. I'm late. I've got to make it up. I'm going to start shitcoining. I'm going to use these leverage products. I'm going to go ahead and use options trading. If you don't know what a covered call is, or you don't understand what volatility decay is, you already have lost. Don't do this. Speaking of MSTX and they, in their prospectus, they tell you we have tracking error, meaning they can't settle. Sometimes they can't make the price at the end of the day match the Bitcoin they've got. They're having slippage. It's because the swap market's not big enough, and they're using options. So if you and if you don't understand what a covered call is, you can make a lot of money with a covered call. Right now, you could sell MSTR stock and make 200% interest in a year. But at some point, as you're doing it, you sell. The same thing with Bitcoin. If you do covered call with Bitcoin, at some point, it sells. And if you're a miner, that's fine. Or if you got 100 Bitcoin and you say, hey, guess what? I'm going to get rid of 3 Bitcoin this year. So you just put your 3 in there and you earn your yield knowing the risk. I kind of forgot what we were talking about other than, oh yeah, okay, so you can't do that. You can't get caught in a mark-to-market leverage where you're called, margin's calling at the end of the day and you don't have the money. It's gone and you're not going to get it back. So you got to be smart. Just stack Bitcoin. It's enough return. I mean, like I said, if you just get a tenth of a Bitcoin and hold on for 20 years, you're the wealthiest person around. So just do those 3 things. That's all.
I think that people, and it's good advice, especially on the leverage side of things, because I think people have this idea that they can, Hodel described it as thinking you can like teleport to being an OG, if you just get, enough leverage and just and you won't. Maybe, one or 2 lucky people don't get completely wrecked, but odds are that probably won't be you. You probably will get wrecked. And if you would have just, stayed humble, stacked sats, kept those sats safe, educated yourself, tried to go out and create value for the world so that you can stack more sats, you would have been a lot better off and with a lot less stress about, watching numbers on a chart all day long, wondering if you're going to lose all of your money. Like, it's just, I think for most people, it's just, it's not worth it. And that's just also that's not an enjoyable thing, I don't think, to be to need to be so obsessed with watching numbers go up and down in a chart, wondering if you're going to get absolutely destroyed. Like, wouldn't you rather, work hard, create some value, spend time with your family, and just, for DCA, it's just like, I just set it and forget it, right? It just keeps coming out. Like, I think for most people, that is the right advice. And it's also the advice that's going to keep you the most sane and mentally healthy. Like, you don't want to need to obsess over these things too much. Like, everybody likes checking the price chart when the number is going up, right? You're feeling like a genius. It's not so fun when it's going down, unless you're just DCAing all the way up and all the way down. And then it's like, great, price went down. My DCA is going to get me more sats today. It's a good day. And now back to time with my family. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Good advice.
Yeah. I am curious because there's I wanted to get in a little bit as well, just about, these ETFs. I think it's interesting because this has certainly brought in a ton of hype. I mean, they've been like the best performing ETFs ever. They've blown the gold ETFs out of the water by a massive amount, and they're still just getting started. Do you see, any downside to these ETFs? Like, I'm assuming that you would say, hold, better to hold on-chain Bitcoin, real Bitcoin, than a Bitcoin derivative, instrument, than, an ETF or whatever else. But do you see any additional risk in terms of just, like BlackRock now has a very vested interest in Bitcoin. They're accumulating a lot of Bitcoin on behalf of their ETF buyers. Do you see any risks that, now we have, governments, that are going to be getting into the mix soon too with Bitcoin reserves? Does any of that freak you out at all? Or are you confident enough in the game theory of nobody really wants to mess with Bitcoin too much because messing with that Bitcoin messes with their money now? If you're a large Bitcoin holder, like, it's in your interest not to mess with it. I'm just curious where you sit on that.
Yeah, that's a tough subject because there is a risk, to some of the stuff that's going on right now. The majority, I think it's 9 out of 11 of those ETFs have got their coins with Coinbase. And MicroStrategy has the same thing. They've got most of their coins, I think, with Coinbase and some with Fidelity. It's a honeypot, and it is a threat vector. And, the discussion around the 6102 and seizure of Bitcoin, I think that's been blown off a little bit, because you have to realize that Bitcoin's not like gold. When the U.S. government tried to seize gold, people voluntarily gave up gold, but not everybody. And the other thing is, a lot of it was held in banks. It was easily seizable, but it's nothing compared to how easy it would be to seize Bitcoin. Bitcoin has an asymmetric reward in the sense that once you get the keys to it, once it's on a different, once you have it in your wallet, it's gone. It's gone forever. So I do think it's a risk. The thing is, though, Walker, I think it just was inevitable, and I never thought that it wasn't going to happen. Once they approved the CME futures, I mean, it was over. I mean, that was a violation of law that the SEC was doing when they were denying all that spot, and it came out it was a violation. That's why they lost in court. The thing is that it's like options trading. That was inevitable. It's got to happen. In fact, you and I mean, I want Bitcoin to be $100 trillion asset. It will never get to be gold's market cap if you don't have options and liquidity. And we've got that now. And it's growing. The larger it gets, the more flywheel, the more this reinforces itself. It's like escape velocity or approaching a black hole. You get to the event horizon, everything inside past that point, you don't get to see it on the outside. That's it. And it's all going to one little point in the middle, the singularity. Well, we're kind of headed that way, and that singularity is Bitcoin just exploding as the world's store of value, the most pristine capital, that taking wealth that we've misallocated into all these stupid assets like multiple houses, jackass stuff that we're trying to, I don't know what we're spending stuff on. Everybody's trying to store their value somehow and beat the S&P 500 or the cost of capital. And so these things were inevitable. I just think that maybe the key to mitigating the risk is to keep that flywheel going until it's so innocuous. When MicroStrategy entered the NASDAQ 100 this week, that meant so many people who would never have invested in Bitcoin are now exposed to Bitcoin. When they go they're going to get in the S&P 500 next year. I think it'll be in June. When they're in the S&P 500, it's going to be huge. I mean, the amount of inflows, people that have never held Bitcoin are going to be exposed to Bitcoin. All these ETFs are in from Congress, members of Congress to, every pleb to every Peter Schiff, if he hates, Bitcoin and he's got anything, he might even have exposure to it now. So I think there's a risk, but I just don't see how it could have been. There's no answer to this, is what I'm saying.
No, I know what you mean, because I would agree that this was an inevitable part of adoption. Like you can't think that hyper Bitcoinization was going to happen and not think that ETFs and options and companies and countries buying it was not going to happen. Like those two things are inconsistent, right? So this was going to happen because why? Because Bitcoin is the greatest money that has ever existed. It is the hardest asset that has ever existed. Of course, everyone wants it once they realize that. If you realize that and don't want it, well, that's pretty stupid. But anyone who has gotten to the point where they realize that, they want Bitcoin and they want as much Bitcoin as they can have. And luckily they don't have to worry about how much they can carry because, it doesn't weigh anything, unlike gold. But I think that this is why it's also so important in parallel to this, that all of these other technologies, all these other open source technologies, whether it's Lightning, Liquid, Fediment, eCash, that's being built out, all of these other tools become even more important because you need to have these other these tools that encourage sovereignty, that encourage privacy, that make it more difficult for the government to see every last little thing that you're doing. These tools become really, they were always important, but I think they're more important now than ever. And I'm very thankful to all of the open source devs who are hacking away, building these great pieces of freedom technology, because we are going to need them. And I think those are the antidotes to the centralization risks that happen with Bitcoin ownership, with Bitcoin hash rate, with mining pools, with everything else. I also don't think that, again, back to this point, because I think it is important, like I've seen a lot of people say like, you wanted the separation of money and state, but now you're cheering for the state to buy Bitcoin. And it's like, I think that people get a little bit mixed up here, because the separation of money and state does not mean that the state is not going to interact with the money that it is separated from. It means that the state is separated from the creation of that money. And I think that's a very important point. Of course, the state, all nations were eventually going to use Bitcoin. You're not going to, separation of money and state doesn't mean they're not allowed to touch Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't care if you're, me or you or, a nation state. It doesn't know, it doesn't care. That's the point of it. What matters is that they cannot print more Bitcoin out of thin air. What matters is that they can't change the inflation schedule to suit themselves. That is what matters, that the separation of the creation of money and state becomes complete. And we already have that with Bitcoin. That separation already happened when Bitcoin was created. And it just gets stronger and stronger and stronger as the hash rate grows, as more and more people adopt Bitcoin. That separation, because that money now is worth a heck of a lot in their fiat cuck bucks. $2 trillion now, maybe now slightly under it since we had a mega crash today. But I just think that that's an important point for people to really make sure that they understand, is that it's about the separation of the creation of money from state. And we have that. And now, thanks to so many other tools, like Lightning, Liquid, eCash, Fedimints, these allow us to have other tools that can be used in a more localized, decentralized level to retain our privacy, our anonymity, and to be able to cheaply and efficiently transact with each other. And I hope that those sorts of tools encourage more of a movement towards localism, towards smaller communities interacting with each other, because I think that's ultimately the most beneficial for those people who live in those communities.
I think that's spot on. I especially like what you point out about the fact that I want to have the optionality. So, I've got Bitcoin in all kinds of buckets, and some of them are in ETF. I mean, I've got some ETFs because of a retirement account. I've got some in cold storage and multi-sig. I'm using MicroStrategy as a proxy. So I have a lot of different buckets, but I want to be able to move everything into my wallet if I need to, so that I can cross borders or I can escape if I have to. And you're right. I mean, right now you can do that with Bitcoin. And I think it's that optionality that is so important that we keep track of going forward.
Sorry, just realized I was muted. Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that's the beauty of Bitcoin, right? Is that it gives you optionality in a general sense, right? It gives you the option to opt out of the states and the central bank's inflation. It gives you the option to opt out of that physical location and take your wealth with you. It gives you the option to send that wealth to anyone you want without anyone being able to stop you. Bitcoin is optionality. And I think that, it's that, again, that's why on-chain Bitcoin, I think is still absolutely the best thing that you can own if you're able to, and right now you still are. You can still buy Bitcoin. You don't even have to earn it. You can trade your fiat petrodollars, your war currency. You can trade it for Bitcoin right now. What an amazing deal. Like, that's still, that is still a great trade, and it will be until you have to earn Bitcoin by creating value rather than just spending infinite government paper on it. And so I'm glad that we still have the option to do that. For how much longer that happens? And that actually leads me to something else I wanted to ask you, which was, do you think that fiat currencies still stay around for a very, very long time? A lot of people are saying, when hyper-Bitcoinization happens, fiat's gone, right? It's toast. No more fiats ever. I'm not so sure about that. And the other part of this question is, do you think that the United States or any country that prints its own fiat, adopting a strategic reserve of Bitcoin, prolongs the life of that fiat currency, or perhaps may accelerate its own demise?
Well, I'm going to get some Maxis throwing shit at me here. I can just tell, because let's just talk about the dollar. Let's talk about the dollar, and let's talk about fiat currency. the dollar in my mind is not going anywhere for quite a while. And why I say that is because if you look at history and you look at the history of world reserve currencies, they die a very slow death, and it's painful. And even when the power that is underlying that world's reserve currency loses its superpower status, or however you want to call it, whether it's Spain or whatever, or England, that currency it still has legs. It still flops around out there for a long, long time. I don't think that the idea of Bitcoin taking over currencies is a valid. I don't think that's going to happen. And what I mean by that is this. To understand what money is, it passes the stage of what's called a collectible, and then it goes into, and in order, medium of exchange, store of value, medium of exchange, and then a unit of account. The most important layer in that is store of value. That's the one that makes an asset become the most valuable store of value, or the most valuable capital that you can have on the planet. And right now, that's Bitcoin. And I can prove that to you. I can just ask you. I can say, opportunity cost. That's the idea of, if you pass up buying Bitcoin right now, what is the next best alternative asset to own? So if I told you, hey, I've got a beachfront property in Miami, of course, what are you passing up to get that asset? It's Bitcoin. That is the best asset. If I tell you, there's nothing I can name that you won't go, it's Bitcoin. Then Bitcoin's the best answer. So Bitcoin has done that. It has become, and it soon will be recognized as, the greatest store of value we have ever seen on the planet. Bitcoin is the greatest monetary invention in the history of mankind, and it is just being discovered. But what inhibits it from moving past that right now is the fact that, and this is true for me, and it may not be for you, but for many people, I don't like to spend my Bitcoin. I don't like to go out. If I have to buy a car, I'm going to use cuck bucks. And if I have to buy groceries next week, I'm using cuck bucks. Now, I've used Bitcoin before, but what I do is I put it into a spend and fill wallet. I fill it up, I spend it. I fill it up, I spend it. There's no capital gains, so it doesn't mean anything. I did it in El Salvador when I met you and we had dinner. I was just spending like a drunken sailor down there. But it was money that I just put in and spent to just kind of keep it circulating. But real Bitcoin that I hold in that cold storage, I don't want to spend it. I think going forward, more and more people are going to understand that aspect of Bitcoin, and they're going to realize that it's the most precious asset on earth. And as that happens, it's going to become the base layer of whatever you want to call it. But to try and tie a fiat currency to it, it's going to be very difficult. I thought what Saylor was discussing the other day in regarding stable coins, or like Hal Finney discussing tokenized banks or something like that, I can see how Bitcoin could become the pristine capital that could fuel all kinds of credit expansion even, and the things that we don't sometimes like when we associate fiat currencies, but based on a real store of value. I mean, a real base layer that you can audit, immutable, and you can understand. And so the idea that fiat is going to somehow be based on Bitcoin, I don't think you're saying that, and I don't see that as possible. I think that fiat is going to exist, and this idea of maybe coupling it to stable coins so that it has a backing of U.S. treasuries and some Bitcoin and other assets, that's possible. Just look around in the world for a minute. Just let's zoom out for a second. Last year, everybody's talking about BRICS. Everybody's talking about the yuan. Everybody's talking about the threat to the dollar. Last year in international trade, the yuan, it accounted for like just over 4% of all trade in dollars. It's nothing. It's zilch. Not only that, it doesn't even freely float. I mean, if you let it free, it would deflate like a balloon because everybody would escape. The people that are being held into the yuan on shore, they can't get out. You know, there's a capital restriction like 50 grand or something. They can't get out. They want out. Everybody wants out. You think that people in Russia right now don't want out? If they had a way to get either Bitcoin or even a stable coin, and again, the Maxi's going to throw some shit here, but the bottom line is when you travel, if you go to South and Central America, what do people want down there? They're always looking for Tether or Circle. They're constantly, that's what they want. You give them Bitcoin, they turn it into Tether. What would be wonderful is if instead of having this conversation, we could accept Bitcoin for what it is, the greatest monetary invention in the history of mankind, the greatest storage of capital that we will ever find, the greatest storage of wealth, the best final settlement layer, even on the international scale, ever developed. There will never be another one. It's 0 to 1. This is it. If we just understand that and it's adopted at that rate, and then we work on the cuck-butt side of this, meaning that we actually, almost like sailors discussing, really, I guess, is the fact that we use the US dollar and we back it up with a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And we bring the stable coins like Tether, you know, build the fucking regulations out and have them come back. Have them come to the United States and build all of it here so that we are like that beacon that we used to be, that we're that energy, that we're the next 100, 200 years of nothing but just pure light that everybody wants to come to. And we can do that. We can do it with Bitcoin and even with the dollar if we just get on board and make this happen.
I agree with a lot of what you just said. One thing that I will push back on to play devil's advocate is I think that it is important for Bitcoin to be used as a medium of exchange. Now, I hear you when you say, like, I don't want to spend my Bitcoin, like the Bitcoin that's in my cold storage. I feel the same way. I do the same thing with, especially if I'm going to somewhere where I can physically spend, Bitcoin. For example, El Salvador, where you can spend it in a lot of ways and a lot of places. I use one of the many Lightning wallets that I have and top that up with some sats that I just bought and exchanged my cuck bucks for, and that's what I'm using for it, right? I don't think that those two things, I don't think that the fact that people right now don't want to spend Bitcoin that they've been accumulating in cold storage, I don't think that negates Bitcoin as a store of value. I think that that's a preference and that's a natural preference for where we are right now in this adoption phase. I also think it's important to point out that, the quote, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. I think that's the case with the monetary transformation that goes from store of value to medium of exchange to unit of account. I think that many people are you're at different points in that. It's not that everyone goes through that cycle at the same pace or at the same time or at the same place in the world. Different people are going through that in completely different ways. And this is why I also think these L2s and L3s are so important on Bitcoin. Things like Lightning Liquid, Fediment, eCash, because these allow you to have a really great, better privacy-preserving way to utilize Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. And yes, you're using, if it's a Fediment, you're using that, federated eCash there, right? If it's on eCash, you're using non-federated eCash from.
Exactly.
But the point being that, excuse me, I think it is so important for Bitcoin to be used and continue to be used and be used more as a medium of exchange for Bitcoin to truly fulfill that promise. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to be using layer one Bitcoin as that MOE. Bitcoin is just the backbone. It's the it's the TCP/IP, right? It is the base layer. And whatever else is built on top of that can be used to execute that medium of exchange function. And I don't know about you, but personally, I already use Bitcoin as my unit of account. I think a lot of Bitcoiners are the same. You're already thinking in, yeah, you look at the Bitcoin fiat price, but when you're looking at, something you want to buy or something else, you're saying, oh boy, it's going to cost me a lot of sats. I don't know about that. Like you already have moved into that phase. You've already used Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. You do. I believe when I bought the pieces that I have from you, I believe I paid in Bitcoin. If I'm not mistaken,
you did.
So
like I said, that's what I do think that the conversation the conversation really boils down to what you just said. That there's a difference between understanding the base layer and hopefully where this is going in the future. One of the greatest banks of the entire planet was the Medici Bank, formed in 1397. The Medici family, they basically founded the Renaissance, the Age of Enlightenment. It was a family, very wealthy. Almost think of them like a Fediment. Very wealthy Fediment members who came together, formed their bank, and then let that bank germinate all through northern Italy and then out all across the world. That can be a future too. So it's not like, I guess what I'm trying to say is the medium of exchange is going to be very nuanced going forward. What you also said is very true about understanding the value of Bitcoin. Where I live right now, I did this experiment 8 years ago, and I've noticed other people are doing this. They're talking a lot about this, but this was a while ago. This is probably a year ago. Eight years before, I had looked at house prices in my neighborhood. And the average number of Bitcoin, I figured it out. It was 666. That is the mark of Satan. But 666 to buy a house, right? And 4 years later, the prices went up like about $90,000. And I'm sure my neighbors were going, damn, this is awesome. But for me, that price had gone from 666 to 44 Bitcoin. And then this last year, it went to 5. And the houses went up 100 grand. So from 666, Satan, 444 or 44 to 5 in 8 years. So the reason I mention that is once you understand the value of that, there's a reason why we have a tendency to not want to let it go. And perhaps the answer is to use that wealth to try and build these layers and to help other people through, interacting with the base layer and these either Fediment, liquid change. Liquid is not something that you and I couldn't do. We could do the same thing. There's 20 some odd functionaries, and there's 11 of 15 that have to sign the block to get the transaction out. And they block every 1 minute. It's fast. 2 minutes, you got settlement. But there's nothing to prevent using blockchain's technology to develop that with a group of people who couldn't then provide that service. Where's liquid used? I mean, Aqua's used mainly in South and Central America. It helps people. It helps them a lot. So maybe that is the future for us, which is a very hopeful future.
I think you're exactly right. And what Fedi has done with the Fediment protocol, I think, is exactly in that vein, where it's like anyone can set up a federation and be able to transact anonymously and basically freely within it. And that is incredibly powerful stuff. And, another interesting thing too about like the, not wanting to spend your Bitcoin, it's like when at a certain point when you've gotten basically, all into Bitcoin, well, there's nothing else for you to spend. You know what I mean? Like I like watches. Hey, I enjoy watches too. But I prefer to get some original replica watches, as they're lovingly called, from other parts of the world, because boy, I can't justify spending too much on one. But I do love a nice timepiece. But speaking of time, George, I want to be conscious of yours as well, and I want to kind of move to sort of wrap this up a little bit. And I was thinking maybe we've covered a lot today, and maybe just a good place to kind of end with would just be, do you have a message for people who still are on zero Bitcoin, who are looking at this and they're saying, maybe they're saying it's too expensive, maybe they're saying I missed the boat, maybe they're saying, I'm going to buy Bitcoin, but I'm going to buy later when it crashes down to whatever, whatever price level is acceptable to me, but then I'll probably adjust that later and say, well, it crashed so much, I'll wait for it to go even lower. What do you say to the people who are still on zero?
Well, I think I would talk first to the Bitcoiners.
Okay.
We Bitcoiners, we come across as like an evangelical cult. We have a tendency to want to orange pill people pretty intensely. And I've kind of found as going forward that it just doesn't work. The only thing that's kind of worked for me is to ask people about inflation, and then they start complaining about it. And then I tell them, well, in my world, I get more money every year. I actually have more wealth and I can buy stuff. And if they ask me, I'll tell them, well, I just keep my wealth in Bitcoin. I don't keep it in cash or anything that's dollar denominated. But I have had a really tough time with my family trying to discuss this with them. And I don't know why. You'd almost think, that, I've got a lot of kids. You'd think they'd look at me and go, well, Dad might know something. But for some reason, I don't know what it is. You'll get to see this as your boy grows up. You'll get stupider and stupider. Eventually, you'll be as dumb as a rock. That little kid's going to look at you like, man, boy, that dad's stupid. But the thing is that I tell people, Bitcoiners, when you're sitting on that train station, we were wrong about institutions. They're here now. We set up the tripwires. They're tripped. Flares are in the air. The institutions, they're in the perimeter. They're with us. They're sitting on the train. BlackRock gets on board. He takes 20 seats. And we're going to leave people behind. And if it's your family members, the people you love, and you look out there and you're thinking, well, they're going to miss the boat. You have ability, you have a unique position right now. Remember what I said about just 1/10 of a Bitcoin. You have a unique position right now. You can create generational wealth. What I was discussing earlier about banks, you're going to have the opportunity to create a family like the Rockefellers if you do this right. And so your kids and the people you love, your friends, maybe the people you're going to help in the future with a Fediment, they're sitting out there and the train's leaving and they might try to run along the side, but eventually they'll be looking at the back of the train. It's gone. But someday in the future, for me, it'll be probably when I die and they read the will, but my kids are going to look down in their hand. They're going to go, when they read the will, they're going to go, damn, I've got a Bitcoin ticket. I'm going to go somewhere. And my grandkids too. So, don't just stack for yourself, stack for other people. As far as the people that are maybe oscillating right now or going, well, what if President Trump doesn't announce SBR and Bitcoin crashes down to 80,000? I'll have lost money now. Just start reading, just start understanding. Once you understand Bitcoin, if it clicks for you, you're done. It's like you just push your chips in, you're finished. It's over. You can just relax in life. Every year, as the years go by, you'll just have more wealth, and you can sit there, and if you want to buy a nice watch, you can, or you can help your kids and stuff. So just stop fighting it. Start reading. Educate yourself if you have any, if you're not convicted enough. And then hopefully you'll get in a place where you'll be able to make a difference in people's lives.
Amen to that. And that's a beautiful note to end on, George. Anywhere you want to send people, direct them to, I'll link your X and Oh, good deal. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your time. Looking forward to the next time we can do this in person over a beer. And thanks again. I think there was a lot of great signal and great advice in here today. So I appreciate you sharing.
Oh, you're welcome, bud. We got to help people as much as we can here. And it's nice talking to you too again, Walker. You have a great day.
You too. And that's a wrap on this Bitcoin Talk episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. If you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring the Bitcoin Podcast, head to bitcoinpodcast.net/sponsor or send an email to hello@bitcoinpodcast.net. If you are enjoying the Bitcoin Podcast and find it valuable, give it a boost on Fountain, a 5-star review wherever you're listening, or better yet, share this show with your network so more people can learn about Bitcoin. Or don't. Bitcoin doesn't care, but I sure do appreciate it. You can grab links in the show notes to watch or listen to this show wherever you get your podcasts, or go to bitcoinpodcast.net/podcast. And you'll also find the links to follow me and the show on Nostr and on X. Bitcoin is scarce. There will only ever be 21 million, but Bitcoin podcasts are abundant. So thank you for spending your scarce time to listen to the Bitcoin Podcast. Until next time, stay free.